Hey there, fellow ELA teachers. It's Elizabeth from the Big Kids Hall and Bitsy in the middle. And I find myself in an odd position this year. I'm in a new building, I'm at a new grade level. And what I'm finding is that my units that I've worked so hard in building in the past won't roll up nicely at all. And I find myself building units from the ground up, something I haven't had to do in a while anyway. I'm also in a school that is in the middle of transitioning from a more traditional model to a workshop model. That's good for me because workshop's what I'm used to, but it's more at the fourth and fifth grade levels. So I'm going through the work of building a workshop-oriented seventh grade ELA unit and thought you might like to come along on the journey and see how it's all done. This is the first section of the planning process, which is setting overall big goals for my units. By the time I've finished, we'll be able to answer what types of goals might one consider when planning a well-rounded, balanced unit for secondary ELA. Which question is the most important when beginning to plan a unit, and how can I differentiate goals for sections that have different needs? Let's get started. So when I'm at the outset of planning a unit, the first thing I want to do is figure out what my overall broad goals are for the unit, and those come in 4 different categories. The first thing I think about are the toolbox goals, the strategies, the thinking that I'm going to add to my students' reading and writing toolboxes that will make them more independent, better, strategic readers. The second kind of goal that I consider is a thematic goal. I am an ELA teacher. I have opportunities to teach my children more about the world and being better people. And so I can use themes that run through all of my text to create continuity for the unit, but also to use some of those affective goals. The third thing I think about are social goals. These are middle schoolers and they will be social. So how am I going to use that to turn them into better communicators and better able to help each other make meaning? Finally, yes, I've got to pay props to the established goals, those standards that we all have. Yes, my children are absolutely more than test scores, but there is a test waiting at the end, and that's what's going to judge us all, whether we like it that way or not. But there's a second question that is of extreme importance, and that's why. Why am I teaching my kids these things? Because if I can't state that simply and succinctly, my unit's going to be all over the place. I am teaching so that my children can do certain things because those things matter. And if I can't explain what those things are and why they matter, I'm wasting everybody's time. In addition, I've got 2 sections that really don't like to read and will always ask, why do we have to do this stuff? I need a real answer for how this works in the real world. So as I said, I begin with thinking about the toolbox goals. Where do my kids struggle? Where can I give a push? What tools do they need in order to handle more advanced work? And right now it's winter break. I go back to school in about a week and we'll wrap up the first semester and carry on. It's time to give a push. It's time to introduce some more interesting or challenging things. And I already know that it's going to create some freak out. So my toolbox strategies I want to teach with this unit are fix-up strategies. What are you going to do when you don't know what to do? There are some things that my students don't do that more advanced readers can do. And it's okay to be general with that. As I get deeper into the planning, I'll plug in the more specific things I think students can do with particular texts. And there I have my working title for my unit, Fix Up Strategies for No Drama Reading. Now, I teach 3 sections. I have 75-minute blocks. I see them every day. But I have 3 very different personalities among my blocks. I start my day with my inclusion class. I have 28 students, 19 IEPs, and 21 of the 28 are boys. They actually are really cool in that they know that they may not know stuff, and they're willing to try. They don't fold right away, but they do sometimes put their hands up and wait for someone else to fix it for them. I want them to learn to do these things independently. I have a standard class, 28 kids, pretty standard class, a very mixed bag of students, many of whom aren't fans of reading, even though they're honors math students. And they want to be entertained, so that's going to be a little more of a challenge. Finally, I have my honors class in the afternoon, 31 students. They've all qualified for honors, but they're so used to knowing how to do everything, they freak out if there's something that throws them. And we need to work on how to handle the freak out. So you can take a look there that what I've written on the screen reflects my basic problem for each of my classes. And more importantly, I've included the why that class needs that goal. So once I've got my overall toolbox goals set, it's time to start thinking about a theme that will be the thread that holds the unit together and offers some continuity. In addition, it's a concept I think will benefit my students in the real world. I start by heading to the library or into my own classroom, big boxes of books, and start to see what's available to me. My toolbox goals, you'll remember, are that I want to teach fix-up strategies, so I'm going to have to find something that's fairly challenging. I'm thinking in particular of a standard we haven't addressed yet that is about looking at different characters' perspectives. So it would be nice if at least with my 2 standard classes that I could find books that have different characters speaking at different times. That would definitely present the challenge I'm looking for. So initially I found 2 texts that I thought would serve well for my inclusion and my standard classes. The more difficult of the 2 is actually the underneath, which I will use with my inclusion class. It not only has multiple perspectives, but it's got 3 separate storylines that will intertwine closer and closer until the end when they all come together. There are time bounces from the present to way in the past. There's a character that runs through the whole timeline. It should confuse them pretty solid. On top of that, it's got mythology in there, so we have to figure out what's fantasy and what isn't. It should serve well. It also has a touch of whimsy, which will make it less good for my regular standard class who needs to be entertained. If it's not funny, or if it's not in your face like the awful scenes that are in Touching Spirit Bear, they're not interested. So I needed to find something that also had multiple perspectives, but would be entertaining. And in that, I found Gordon Corman's Schooled, which left me with something to find for my standards. So I'm looking at what holds together underneath and Schooled and trying to find something challenging that goes along with some of the basic thematic content of that. And I found The Taming of the Shrew. And so from here, I'm going to go to some planning sheets. I will actually link these in to you down at the bottom. They're free. Just feel free to use them. You can see where I've already typed in what I had on a previous slide with my toolbox goals. But now I want to start thinking about a theme. Now, if I were to look at those 3 texts, I can find possessive love as a universal theme in the underneath and in Taming of the Shrew, but not in Schooled. I can find fitting in Schooled and Taming of the Shrew, but not in the underneath. I've got a bunch of things where it almost works. So the one thing I did finally find when I thought about it that went across all 3 is the idea that there is a character who is a real jerk, someone who is all about themselves, and they get a comeuppance. Now I've got something I can work with, hubris. And on top of that, that opens up a lot of mythology options to go with the underneath. So if I were to sit there and look for a universal theme, I could say hubris. What does it do in those books? Well, it makes bad things happen to our main characters. So if I were to write this as a simple stated understanding, I would use subject, verb, object. And in this case, I'm looking at hubris creates consequences. Now I've got a thread to tie all the texts I work with together, even though they may be from different genres and so on. And then, of course, I need to address the why. Why would I want to teach hubris creates consequences? Well, it's middle school. You definitely have the pride goeth before a fall thing going on sometimes, and maybe it will be good for students to be able to recognize it in themselves and others before the actual fall. And I'm ready to roll on now. I've got my toolbox goal of fix-up strategies for no drama reading. I've got my thematic understanding as hubris creates consequences, so now it's ready to look at social goals. I want my students to acquire language that supports comprehension and allows them to give useful feedback to a reading partner. I want them to recognize misconceptions that other people might have in a respectful way and help them use that language to get them back on the right track. I want them to use specific language to support meaning making in partnerships and in book clubs. Why do I want them to be able to do that? Well, in the real world, if I get lost, I'm going to go down the hall and ask for help from a colleague or a friend. I might help someone too, and I wouldn't want to make that person feel bad in the process. They're going to be working in teams when they go out into the real world. They need to know how to do that well. Then here's the second page of my unit planning papers that I use, and I will move my social goals to this. Again, that's linked in. So now it's time to pay our props, pay the piper, do what we got to do. And that is to address the established goals. My state uses a kind of repackaged Common Core. The reading goals are nearly identical to Common Core, and we do face state testing that is do or die within the last 10 days of the school year. So I really do have to get these in too. All of my sections, we always address the power standards. In my case, that's reading literature, reading informational text, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, making inferences, supporting with text evidence, finding theme and how it is developed over the course of a piece, and interactions among different story elements. That's always going to be in any unit I plan, because a massive majority of the test comes from those. In addition, my standard inclusion classes still need more help with finding meaning for unknown words and with the challenging text that should continue. Also with my inclusion and my standard classes, I'm going to work with standard 7.6, compare and contrast points of view among characters. Again, why I'm getting the books with different perspectives. My honors class, however, I'm going to do a compare and contrast with the film version. 10 Things I Hate About You is PG-13 and will go nicely with Taming of the Shrew. If I have some honors early finishers, we'll probably work in some sonnets because we're doing Shakespeare. 7.5 structure contributes to meaning. So now I know what I'm teaching, and I even can explain why I'm teaching it. So we're done. You should be able to answer what types of goals might one consider when planning a well-rounded, balanced unit for secondary ELA. What tools are your children going to add to their toolboxes? What themes are they going to learn they can use in the real world with understandings? How are they become better communicators in social settings? And finally, what standards are we going to hit so that in the end everything is successful? I've also dropped in a couple of books you might find useful. Understanding by Design is a fabulous way of looking at how to plan units that are goal-oriented, understanding-oriented, worth your time. Also, Cornelius Miner's We Got This is new from Heinemann, and he does a great job explaining why we need to include the why, especially if we're dealing in more challenging environments. So, next stop is planning our assessments.